G'day there. You're watching the Aussie BIM Guru, and today I'm covering a topic that I realized I sort of skipped over without thinking that people actually probably need to learn about it. So I'm going to be covering today scope boxes and key plans in Autodesk Revit. And I'm going to be using a little bit of Dynamo just to demonstrate some scripts that I've done in past videos. Because I realized that not everyone actually knows how to do this, even though I set up a video recently to cover it in Dynamo. So in this session, we're going to be looking at creating, naming, and laying out scope boxes in Revit. And I'll just give you a rough guideline of how I tend to do it. And I'm going to show you just how to create dependent views and apply those scope boxes as well. But from there, we're going to create a custom key plan for our sheets to tell us which zone we're actually in. So in principle, we use scope boxes to split up plans typically, because often our plans won't fit on a sheet. And scope boxes are a great way to constrain a piece of our view to fit on a sheet, but also to standardize the size of that plan on multiple sheets and multiple levels. So excuse the joke there for some of the internet lovers out there. So typically when I look at my plan, I try to figure out how to best divide it up in order to minimize the number of sheets that I need, but to maximize the ease of reading my drawing set. So you want to try and make sure your scope boxes line up and that there's not too many of them. And ideally you make them as big as possible. So I'll show you how I go through that process in Revit. And then from there, I actually go and create a key plan. So I've got a little workflow that I tend to use, which I find is quite streamlined in order to create something quite effective to tell a client or someone reading the drawing which part of the building they're looking at. Because often we forget as architects that people don't naturally read drawings like we do. So it's good to add these little wayfinding mechanisms so they can find their way around your drawing pack. So I'm going to be using a couple of Dynamo scripts. I'm not going to be showing how to build them. I'm just going to be showing them in practice because I haven't really shown myself using my Dynamo scripts in sequence, because a lot of my scripts are built to work together. And this is a great way to show 3 scripts working together. So I'm going to be using one to create my sheets, and then I'm going to be placing my views on sheets as well. But I'm also going to be creating dependent views from a very recent tutorial. And this is the one that made me think I probably need to actually cover scope boxes because people may not understand the concept. So without further ado, let's jump in and actually start setting up a scope box set of plans. So I'm just going to be working with the default advanced architectural project from the Autodesk templates. So by default, we have a 1 to 100 plan in this set, which is great because it fits on a sheet. But let's say we want to make a 1 to 50 series because we need to show more information, which is quite common for, say, like an FF&E plan. So let's just duplicate our plan and we'll just rename this. So where it says copy 1, we'll just call this 1 to 50. And as you can guess, I'm going to change the scale as well to 1 to 50. So if I just make a new sheet and I'll just pick A1 as my sheet size and I place this view on a sheet, lo and behold, as you expect, it doesn't fit. So we have a bit of a problem. So we need to find out how to break up our drawing set to fit it on sheets. And obviously I could go and just reduce the crop of my view by just clicking on this little button here and reducing the crop of each part of my plan. And I could do that over and over again and do that for every level. But the problem is that I'm doing this manually each time and there's no connection between each zone. So I use scope boxes to get around this. So when I first look at scope boxes and how to fit my drawings on sheets, what I'll do is typically line up my view on my sheet space, and I'll roughly pick one of my corners. So in this case, I'm going to pick my top left corner of my view. Sorry, it looks like my Revit session's going a little bit slowly. Come on. I think my remote desktop app is a little bit clunky tonight, so just bear with me. Promise it will be worth it. Okay, so what I usually do then is I zoom in and I'll just activate my view. Wow, it's really suffering tonight. You can probably just see how chuggy this app is tonight. Okay, hopefully it speeds up. So I'll activate my view. I think my roommate's torrenting again. Come on. Alright, so I'm in my view. So under the view tab, you'll find this scope box, under the view tab, you'll find this scope box tool. If you click on that, you can basically start drawing up a zone. So what I'll usually do is I'll pick a little bit of white space around my sheet because I want my grid heads to go a bit past my scope box. So typically the best way to set up a scope box is to make sure that you go a little bit past a grid. Now the reason you want to do this is because in architecture, you always need to set things out off grids. So if you don't have a grid near an element that you might need to dimension to, it can be problematic. So you've got to make sure your scope boxes can always be close to a grid. So I'm just going to pick this grid, and that'll be my first scope box. Ideally, you should try and keep very similar size scope boxes so that between each sheet you don't lose a sense of scale as you jump from sheet to sheet. But essentially at that point, what I tend to do is jump back to my main plan and try to lay out the rest of my scope boxes. And I'll tend to mirror them upon grids. So I'll mirror this one upon a grid. I'll mirror this one upon a grid. And I'll mirror this one upon a grid. So we're actually sticking to pretty uniform size here, which is good. You can see we just fit across here. Unfortunately, we are going to get some very small sort of itty bitty sheets on the end of our sheet set, which isn't great. So that can be a little bit of a pain. It's up to you to make the call how you best want to fit your views in your set. In this case, I'm just going to wear it, and I'm just going to go down to 6 zones. You can see that scope boxes don't have snaps, so as I drag my handles, there's no soft snaps you can really grip onto, which is a little bit of a pain. It takes a while to get used to, so just be precise when you're adjusting your scope boxes. Don't be quick and sloppy like I'm being. Anyway, so at that point we've got 6 zones. So the first thing I'll do is name them. I'll name them left to right, top to bottom typically. If you know that this project scope might be expanding and maybe you'll end up gaining some zones around here, it's up to you whether you want to future-proof your naming convention to make room for those zones. So I could call this, say, A1, A2, A3, B1, B2, B3. That way my system has room to grow if it needs to. But at the moment I'm just going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So obviously if a zone came in here, it would become zone 7. So you'd be going 1, 2, 7, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's not a lot of risk proofing in the way I'm setting this up, but I'm just doing that to keep it simple. So I'm going to make this zone 4, zone 5, and zone 6. And I'm going to be using a Dynamo script I set up in a previous tutorial in order to generate the dependent views. But if you didn't have a Dynamo script, you can just right click on your main view, duplicate as a dependent, and by default it will be the same name with dependent 1. I usually recommend replacing dependent 1 with the name of the scope box or the zone, say zone 1. And then all you have to do is set the scope box of the dependent view in its properties to zone 1. And essentially that will crop, and I'll just delete that section. That will crop the view, but the main view is still the same. And it's important to understand that if I do something in the main view, it will translate into my dependent views as well, and also neighboring views as well. So they share a common annotation space. So if I put some text here, you can see that text appears in my dependent view. So that's how you can maintain common annotations between those sort of in-between zones if you want to see a room tag. But I do typically recommend avoiding documenting around these periphery zones because you will see these annotations sort of bleed into each other's sides if you annotate quite close to these boundaries. So just be mindful which scope boxes you're working in and which ones should have the right tags and elements within them. Because ideally you don't want annotations to be sitting outside your views when they're on their sheet. Okay, but at this point I'm just really gonna just create a copy of level 2 and a copy of level 3, and then we're gonna run the Dynamo script that will apply the dependent views. Then we'll set up some sheets, and then we'll move those views to sheets. So again, I'm just gonna call this 1 to 50 and 1 to 50 instead of copy 1. Cool. Okay, so I'm not going to set up dependent views yet. What I do have at the moment is I do have what I call a sheet input. So this is basically for my Dynamo script that sets up placeholder scripts from my views to sheet series that I showed at the start of the video. It has sheet number, sheet name, and then just a couple of extra parameters you can populate. The way the script works is you can add extra parameters in your header row, and the script will detect these and know how to populate those parameters as you name them up here. So we're going to just get a sheet number and a name. We're creating 1 sheet per zone. So we'll use that Dynamo script in order to set up those sheets. So we're just going to run this through Dynamo Player. So we're going to run create, actually we'll create sheets first, then we'll create dependents. Okay, so I'm just going to go to my inputs for my script, and I'm just going to specify that Excel file. And otherwise, that's pretty much all the input that script requires. There is actually a script before this that can create floor plan sets as well from the same series, so feel free to check that one out if you're interested. But in this case, I already had floor plans to start with. Okay, so we'll just browse to our input data, so sheet input. And the sheet's called sheet 1, and we're just going to ignore the header row for our data. So we'll just ignore one row at the top. And we'll play this, and this should set up what are called placeholder sheets. So these are sheets that aren't placed in your sheet browser yet. I prefer this because it gives the user the option to store sheets for later. If they want to set up, say, their entire sheet set at the start of a project, but they don't want to place all the sheets in their project yet. So if you go up to view after that sheet, and there you go, there's all our sheets that have come in as placeholders. So I can just add those all to my project. And there you go, Dynamo set up a whole bunch of sheets for us already without us having to do anything. So feel free to check out that script and the tutorial for it. I still use the exact same script, it hasn't changed. Another one that hasn't changed as well that I'm about to use is to apply dependent views. So this one runs through data shape, so it has a custom user interface. And this video would have just come out slightly before this. So this is the interface. So you pick your views you want to apply dependent views to. So I'm going to pick my 3 1 to 50 views. And then you get to pick the scope boxes you want to apply as dependent views. In this case, I'll just pick all 6. Apply as dependent. And essentially we should end up with a set of 6 views as dependents on each primary floor plan we picked. And they're all going to be named the same, with zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, zone 5, zone 6. And these should have the scope boxes applied in each case. So really easy. You can see this saves a lot of time. And the last thing we're going to do is place those views on sheets. So what you need to do for this script is it expects you to have one reference view already set up. So in this case, I'm going to pick zone 1 for the first level. And you essentially need to tell this script what viewport type you want to use explicitly by typing its name in. So in this case, it's called no title. This script I have actually changed a little bit since I last built it. There's a couple of bugs with the original version on my tutorial. So I probably will release an updated version of this script. But if you want a copy in the meantime, just email me and I'm more than happy to send it to you because a couple of people have requested this when they found out the bug in the one that I released originally. I think the bug comes in 2.0.3, but worked in 2.0.2 of Dynamo. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to run views to sheet, and the input for this one again is Excel based. It's in this case I've just called it view to sheet. Essentially, it's the sheet number and the view name that you want to put on that sheet. And you need a reference sheet. So I've modified the script now so that you pick a reference sheet. So we're going to pick that views to sheets Excel data. Well, we're going for sheet 1, ignoring the top row. We're going to use floor plans as our type that we're placing, and our view title is called no title. So we'll pick our reference view, which is this view here. So I'm just selecting it as a model element. So that's a change I've made to work around the bug that came about before. Most of the bugs related to viewport detection. So all the viewport detection nodes had some issues in 2.0.3. Okay, so if I run this, and if you keep an eye on my sheet browser, all these sheets should be placed. And because my scope box was nearly always the same size, these should all be in pretty similar positions each. Looks like I might have named some views differently because a couple of them failed to place. All my level 3 views have failed to place, so I might just rerun that script and just cross-check the naming convention. So level 3, 1 to 50, zone 1. Alright, let's just cross-check the names. Views to sheets. Interesting. Okay, it looks like there's too many spaces. Yeah, there's too many spaces here. So I just need to remove one of those spaces. So it does expect the view name to be explicit. So in this case, you can see literally just one space meant that it didn't find a match. So what we'll do is just rerun that. And again, we'll pick our reference sheet. I've just refreshed the script so that it's not confused as to what it's meant to be doing. So I'll browse back to that views to sheets. And now it should work. So that typo was what was the cause. Scope boxes, views to sheets. I highly recommend you check out these particular videos so that you understand how this works. Very interesting. It's still not working. Because I had the area plan picked for my view type. Now if I rerun this, it should work. I need to specify the view type because multiple views can have the same name if they're different view types. Okay, but there you go. You can see that's placed all the sheets on the views as dependents. So that's great. In this case, I think it's picked the wrong view type because I didn't specify no title. But in this case, I can just pick all an entire project and say no title. And you can see that they're being placed in pretty much the same spot. They're all being centered by Dynamo. So the last thing we need to do with our views, now that they're on scope boxes, well, actually two things. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up what's called a view reference. Not a lot of people know about view references, but they're quite handy. So essentially, the user doesn't know what sheet is coming next in this drawing, but we can use what's called a view reference. So if I just open up this view, and I go to View tab, and there's a little symbol here, view reference, I can add this little view reference here, and it's a special object. It basically understands that it's looking for a related view, so you can call it floor plan or elevation or ceiling plan, and it essentially forms a cross-reference. So in this case, I'm going to put one on the side of my sheet, which cross-references this zone over here, and you can rotate them as well, and they can usually sit just outside. So at the moment, the view reference looks a bit weird. It's using this family here, m_view reference. Let's just make a new one. So if I go to new family, new family, and I go to family templates, annotations, you'll notice there's no view reference. I'll just cross-check if there's a view reference added onto these categories now. Okay, there isn't still. Interesting. So usually to get a view reference started, I usually just go annotations, generic annotation, and then I change the category under here to view reference. Cool. So now we're dealing with a view reference family. So I'll just set up a little label here. So under create label, I'll just make a new one and I'll just call it 5mm. Let's make it a bit bigger. Let's make it bold, opaque, that'll do. Okay, so you click once and you can see that you can either pick the detail number of the sheet or the sheet number. So in this case, I'm going to just pick the sheet number. And I'm just going to add a prefix. I'll refer to sheet A101 space on a suffix for continuation. And there you go. You can also add a option to just wrap between parameters only so that it always stays on one line. So that's typically how I build a view reference at that point. So if we just save this and then load it, we can use this as our view reference element instead, which looks a little bit more professional. So not a lot of people seem to know about this tool. It seems to have slipped under the radar in Revit for the most part. Okay, so I'll just select this, go to its type properties, and you can rename the view reference if you like. Sorry, I didn't have that selected. Edit type, and you can call this something else. I can just call this view ref or view red. So we can pick that family we've made, and there you go. You can see that instead that we'll call out the sheet's properties. And if this sheet changes in property, the view reference updates. That's why it's so good. So if I just add some things to it, you'll see that this also updates to change to those characters I added to my sheet number. So yeah, not a well-known tool, that one. They can't be changed in Dynamo from what I've seen, which is really frustrating. So they're still quite manual in being placed and set up. I'll just move that one. I think that one must be outside my crop boundary. Actually, I'll get a new one. I don't think they can be rotated with the spacebar either, which is a bit strange. So if you want to make another one, you can just pick this, and now you can say zone 3, and you'll see it updates. And the good thing about view references, the reason why I use them over generic annotations, is because even though this is in zone 2, view references are special. They know that they shouldn't be showing up in neighboring views of different scope boxes. So you can see that I can't see this view reference, but if I go to my overarching floor plan, my main one, I should be able to see them. So they're a special annotation element. They know how to behave in the host view and also their dependent view that they're placed in. So they're really great for that purpose. I wouldn't use generic annotations. I'd always use view references for that. Cool. All right, so the last thing we're going to do is we're going to create a key plan to put on our sheets to tell someone where they are in our sheet set. So usually what I do for this is I start drawing a detail line. Let's just draw this over our scope box, and you can be pretty rough because we're going to scale this thing down. So I usually draw this thing quite far out from my building, and I create a detail group, and I open the group. And the reason why I like this is because you can't select anything in the model except for what you're drawing in the group. And essentially you just go a bit nuts now and just start drawing your key plan. You can be more accurate than me. I'm just going a bit quick so that you guys don't have to wait too long. And you pretty much just draw every line that relates to a scope box. So I'm pretty much just drawing every single division between the scope boxes, because we're going to be able to create filled regions that highlight where these occur. Okay. Notice that where things overlap like this, I won't usually show both. I'll only show the edges that actually form a scope box edge. Same here. So I won't join it across this scope box because there is no scope box sharing this side. Alright, and you can obviously go and just nudge things if you've been, really rough like me. You can see I've been very rough with that. Notice I've been drawing these in thin lines. So what I'm going to draw now is my building outline, but I'm going to intentionally pick a different line type. And you'll see why in a sec. So what we do now is draw our building shape. And again, you can be pretty rough because we're going to be scaling this down pretty small. Cool, let's keep drawing your building outline. Oh, got a cat here to say hi. Always likes joining in my videos. Come on, mate. Alright, so at that point we have a detail group. And because this is a group, we can isolate it, because we're going to export this as a CAD element. Okay, and this will all make sense in a second. I'm going to export CAD formats, DWG, and we're just going to export it isolated. So we'll just call this key plan base. I'll just overwrite this one and leave temporary hide isolate on. Usually it'll try and get you to turn it off because it thinks you've probably made a mistake, but in this case we haven't. Okay, so what we need to do is make our key plan family now. So we're going to go new family, family templates, annotations, generic annotation, and we're going to break the golden rule in Revit. We're going to import CAD. Now I know that usually you've probably been told not to do this. The only environment in Revit where it's okay to do this is in families, because you can't link CAD in families. You can only import CAD. But we're going to clean it up after we import it. So we're going to bring it in as millimeters. Doesn't have to be current view only, but I guess in this case we'll do current view only, because we're going to explode the CAD as well. So we're going to go really crazy and break all the rules. So there you go. It's pretty big. So what you want to do is you want to move it so that its bottom corner is coincident with the origin of the family, because we're going to scale this thing. So I know in my sheet, I'm going to put it on my title block. So I need to check how big I want to make this thing. So on my sheet, I'm going to put it here. I'm just going to nestle it in this little part of my title block. So at the moment, it's 130, and let's just take up, say, 70 mil of height. Cat's really having fun here. So we're going to put it here. So that's how big our family is allowed to be. Obviously that's a lot smaller than our plan. We've just drawn it real world scale. So what I'm going to do is scale this thing down to about 60 mil high and see how we fit this. So I'm going to use my scale tool, and I'm going to scale from this corner to that corner. I'm going to get 50, so much smaller. There it is. And I'm just going to move this thing until it sort of sits within this zone. Okay, so I'm just going to draw the outline of my key plan in invisible lines. This is so I have a reference for my key plan when I go to place it on my sheet. And I also know which space I'm working within. So 130 by 70. Noting that we're working at sheet scale here. Okay. So you can see at the moment I can probably afford to make this thing just a little bit bigger. So let's make this just a bit bigger. There we go, that's pretty good scale. Alright, so we're going to break the rule here, and we're going to explode. So we're going to do a full explode. definitely broken a rule there. Nearly everyone says never do that. This is, again, one case where it's okay to do it, because we're going to clean up the result of doing that. So you want to go to Manage Line Patterns, and just make sure you haven't got any weird AutoCAD line styles that have come through there. Because I worked straight out of a Revit file, it hasn't given me any strange ones. They're all solid lines. Beyond that, we just need to make sure that our imported object styles are cleaned up as well. But we're going to take advantage of them. So you can see here we have two styles that came from CAD, detail thin and detail wide. So our thin lines are all of our scope box backgrounds. So we're just going to call this key plan zones, and we'll make it gray. So it's going to be a little bit half-toned. And we'll rename the wide one to key plan building. And we'll make this a little bit thicker, and we'll make it black. So you can see we can reappropriate those line styles, which saves a bit of time. And then we're just going to make one called key plan zone. And we'll make that one red, and we'll make that 3. We'll make that pretty thick as well. So that's going to be our active zone. And there we go. So we've pretty much not had to redraw any of that. We've just scaled down out of Revit. So now we need to actually indicate which key plan zones are active. I'm going to use filled regions for this. So I'm going to create a filled region using my key plan zone style, which is that red style. And I'm just going to draw one of my zones here. So I'm going to set its pattern to be just like a diagonal crosshatch. So we'll just call this key plan fill. And we'll just pick a diagonal up style, but I'll duplicate it and make it a bit closer together. I'll just call this key plan hatch. You might want to call it something that makes sense in your project. Actually, I'll do 1.5. So much more dense. And we'll make this a thickness of 3, and we'll make it red, so it's quite obvious. That way you still see your building underneath the fill, but it stands out over everything else. So obviously my key plan zone is going to be quite obvious in my project. So what we're going to do is just pick that, and we're going to give it a visibility parameter. So I'm just going to call this zone 1. Make it an instance space parameter, and we'll just keep it under other for now. And as you can guess, we're just going to go and create every single zone. So just bear with me, feel free to skip ahead about a minute probably, because this will give us the ability to independently turn on and off each respective zone of our key plan at will. And we will find a smarter way to manage these in the model using Dynamo, but not in this video. So we'll do zone 3. As you can guess, that's going to be the next video. Zone 4. This is just some of that slightly more manual CAD work that you probably thought BIM was getting you away from, but there's always a little bit there for us. Zone 5. And zone 6. And I feel like a CAD monkey again. Cool. So the reason that we've made them all visibility parameters is that we're going to connect these all to a number parameter to detect which zone we want to have turned on, just based on one field. So I've just turned off all the reference lines just so it's a nice little thumbnail display. So we're going to create a parameter called active zone. And the way that I usually manage these is typically zone 0 will be all zones on at the same time, and every other zone will be the respective zone that we're trying to toggle it to. So we want to make that an integer-based parameter, and we can pretty much put it under any category we want. We'll just put it under we'll put it under graphics. It's really a graphics-based parameter, and this will drive every other parameter. So we need to use some formulas to drive these zone parameters. So we're going to use an OR condition. So we're going to turn on zone 1 when either active zone equals 0 or active zone equals 1. And then same for zone 2, except active zone equals 0 or 2. So I'm just copying and pasting that formula and just updating this number for each one. So at the moment, active zone is 0. So as you can see, all my zones turn off. But obviously as I change this, you'll see that my zone updates to which one I'm telling it to be. So really easy. And obviously you can do like zone 7 if you don't want to see any of them. But in this case, I'll just make it 0 by default. So we'll just do a purge just to get rid of any potential rubbish that CAD import brought in, but I believe that's probably cleaned up all the rubbish that CAD brings. Okay, so we'll just save our key plan and we'll load that into our project. And as you can guess, we can just place this on our title block. You could nest this in your title block if you wanted to. Often I don't, because sometimes you want flexibility for being able to move your key plan to other areas of your sheet if you have, say, horizontal or vertical title blocks. But obviously I can say, you know, in this sheet, I'm in zone 1. So I'll just say zone 1, and there you go. My key plan tells me I'm in zone 1. But if I'm in, say, zone 2, then I can say zone 2. Obviously, if I go to my main floor plan, where I'm in all zones at once, I can just paste this to the same place, and I can set myself to zone 0 instead, so that it says I am in all zones currently. I'm looking at my whole plan. And that way, as your client goes through your drawing set, they understand which part of the building they're looking at. Because to someone that hasn't seen the drawing set before, they may not know what they're looking at when they see this drawing. It's not the most easily identifiable zone of the building. But that's pretty much it. So that's just some practice that I use for most of my projects, and hopefully it helps other people in setting up their projects as well and breaking up their scope boxes. So in the next video, I'll be setting that key plan number parameter based on the view placed on the sheet, because obviously it's very slow to go to each sheet and set that key plan value for each respective view. So we're going to do a much faster method to set that. And this method could be used for things like north points as well. There's a lot of potential for what it could do. So thanks for watching today. If you've got any feedback or comments, feel free to leave it down below. And any requests for future videos are always welcome as well. I'm getting a few coming in now, which is great. And whilst I may not be able to do your video straight away, it goes in a list and I'll get to it when either my skills have advanced to deal with it or I've put a video together to cover it. So feel free to reach out. So if you're not already following and subscribing, feel free to do so. I make videos about 3 times a week, so I'll keep trying to do that. And thanks for all your support. So thanks, take care, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.